I'm George Jones, a health specialist from Imperial College London, and what I'm about to share with you might fundamentally alter the way you approach your weekly shop at Tesco, Sainsbury's, or wherever you purchase your groceries. For decades, the humble British sausage has occupied a cherished position in our national cuisine, gracing our breakfast plates alongside eggs and beans, sizzling at summer barbecues, and providing comfort on cold Sunday evenings. Yet beneath the familiar aroma and reassuring packaging of many supermarket sausages lies a disturbing reality that most consumers remain entirely unaware of, a reality that could be quietly compromising your cardiovascular health, elevating your cancer risk, and contributing to a host of inflammatory conditions that may not manifest for years or even decades. The sausages that millions of British families consume each week, trusting major retailers and household brand names to provide safe, nutritious food, are in many cases loaded with ingredients that would shock you if you truly understood what they were, how they're produced, and what the scientific literature tells us about their long-term health implications. The statistics surrounding sausage consumption in the United Kingdom are staggering, with British consumers purchasing over £500 million worth of sausages annually, translating to roughly 225,000 tonnes of sausages moving from supermarket shelves into homes across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland each year. We've elevated the sausage to cultural icon status, celebrating varieties from Cumberland to Lincolnshire, creating entire festivals dedicated to this processed meat product, and incorporating it into our national identity through dishes like toad in the hole and the full English breakfast. This deep cultural attachment, however, has created a blind spot in our collective awareness, a vulnerability that food manufacturers have exploited by gradually degrading the quality of mass-produced sausages whilst maintaining the comforting imagery and nostalgic associations that keep us reaching for the same products week after week. The trust we place in familiar brands and the assumption that products available in reputable supermarkets must meet adequate health standards has left millions of Britons consuming sausages that fall shockingly short of what we should expect from food in the 21st century. My background researching nutritional epidemiology at Imperial College London has brought me into contact with mounting evidence that processed meat consumption represents one of the most significant modifiable risk factors in the British diet, yet it remains one of the least discussed in mainstream health conversations. The World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer made headlines in 2015 when it classified processed meat as a Group 1 carcinogen, placing it in the same category as tobacco and asbestos based on sufficient evidence linking consumption to colorectal cancer. Specifically, their analysis of over 800 epidemiological studies concluded that each 50-gram portion of processed meat consumed daily increases the risk of colorectal cancer by 18%, a finding that sent shockwaves through the public health community but barely registered with most consumers who continued purchasing their usual sausages without a second thought. In the United Kingdom alone, Cancer Research UK estimates that approximately 13% of the 42,000 annual bowel cancer cases, representing over 5,400 diagnoses each year, are directly attributable to excessive processed meat consumption, an entirely preventable health burden that costs the National Health Service hundreds of millions of pounds whilst destroying families and cutting lives short. The mechanisms through which processed meats contribute to cancer development involve multiple pathways that researchers have been investigating for decades. When meat is processed through smoking, curing, salting, or the addition of preservatives, particularly nitrites and nitrates designated as E249 through E252 on ingredient labels, these compounds can form in nitroso compounds in the digestive tract, which have been demonstrated in laboratory studies to damage the DNA of cells lining the colon and rectum. Additionally, the high-temperature cooking methods typically used for sausages, whether grilling, frying or barbecuing, produce heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, both classes of compounds with established mutagenic and carcinogenic properties. The high saturated fat content in many sausages contributes to chronic low-grade inflammation throughout the body, creating an internal environment conducive to cellular mutation and tumor development, whilst the excessive sodium levels found in most commercial sausages, often exceeding 1.5 grams per 100 grams of product, elevate blood pressure and strain the cardiovascular system in ways that compound over years of regular consumption. Beyond cancer risk, the cardiovascular implications of regular sausage consumption represent an equally serious concern that receives insufficient attention from both healthcare providers and the general public. The British Heart Foundation has repeatedly warned that processed meats high in saturated fats contribute significantly to the development of atherosclerosis, the gradual narrowing and hardening of arteries that underlies most heart attacks and strokes. When we examine the nutritional profiles of popular supermarket sausages, the numbers are genuinely alarming. 2 sausages from certain major brands contain 11.5 grams of saturated fat, which represents more than half the maximum daily intake recommended by the National Health Service for women and more than a third for men. And this is before considering any other foods consumed throughout the day. The problem intensifies when we consider that most people don't stop at 2 sausages, particularly at weekend breakfasts or barbecues where 3, 4, or even 5 sausages might be consumed in a single sitting, catapulting saturated fat intake to levels that place immediate and substantial stress on the cardiovascular system. The sodium content of commercial sausages presents another dimension of this health crisis that deserves far greater scrutiny than it currently receives. The National Health Service recommends that adults consume no more than 6 grams of salt per day, equivalent to approximately 2.4 grams of sodium, yet many sausages contain between 1.5 and 2.5 grams of salt per 100 grams of product. Given that 2 typical sausages weigh approximately 100 grams combined, a modest breakfast of sausages, bacon, and beans could easily deliver half or more of your entire daily salt allowance before you've even considered lunch, dinner, snacks, or the hidden sodium in bread, condiments, and processed foods that constitute much of the modern British diet. Chronic excessive sodium consumption elevates blood pressure through multiple mechanisms, including increased fluid retention and arterial stiffness, creating a sustained burden on the heart that significantly increases the risk of hypertensive crisis, stroke, heart failure, and kidney disease. The insidious nature of this damage lies in its gradual accumulation, with blood pressure rising almost imperceptibly over years whilst arterial damage compounds silently until a catastrophic event occurs, often in individuals who considered themselves reasonably healthy and had no idea their breakfast choices were steadily undermining their cardiovascular integrity. What makes the situation even more troubling is the extraordinary variability in sausage quality across different brands and price points, a variability that often bears little relationship to cost or the reputation of the retailer selling them. You might reasonably assume that sausages from premium supermarkets or well-known brands would meet higher standards than budget alternatives, yet testing and analysis reveal that price frequently fails to predict nutritional quality or ingredient integrity. Some of the worst offenders in terms of meat content, additive load, and nutritional profile carry premium branding and price tags that suggest superior quality, while certain budget options occasionally outperform their expensive counterparts. This disconnect between price and quality reflects a food industry that has become expert at exploiting consumer psychology, using packaging design, strategic placement, and carefully worded marketing claims to create perceptions of quality that the actual product fails to deliver. Terms like natural, traditional, premium, finest, and taste the difference appear on labels of sausages that contain mechanically separated meat, extensive filler content, and long lists of additives that have no place in what should be a simple combination of quality meat, seasoning, and natural casings. The concept of mechanically separated meat deserves particular attention because most consumers have little understanding of what this term actually means or why its presence in sausages should concern them. Mechanically separated meat, often abbreviated as MSM on ingredient lists when manufacturers are required to declare it, is produced by forcing bones with attached meat scraps through high-pressure machinery that strips away every last remnant of usable tissue, creating a paste-like substance that bears little resemblance to conventional meat. The process was banned for beef in the United Kingdom and European Union in 2001 following bovine spongiform encephalopathy concerns, as the mechanical separation process risked incorporating spinal cord tissue that could potentially transmit the disease. However, mechanically separated pork and chicken remain legal and widely used in processed meat products, including many commercial sausages. The European Food Safety Authority has acknowledged that whilst microbiological risks associated with mechanically separated meat are similar to those of conventional meat when hygiene standards are maintained, the high-pressure processes used in production increase the risk of microbial growth due to greater muscle fiber degradation and nutrient release that provides an ideal substrate for bacterial proliferation. From a nutritional standpoint, mechanically separated meat typically contains higher levels of bone fragments, connective tissue, and fat compared to conventionally butchered meat, contributing to the undesirable nutritional profiles that characterize many low-quality sausages. The regulatory framework governing sausage production in the United Kingdom, whilst more stringent than in many countries, still permits practices that most consumers would find unacceptable if they fully understood them. According to Food Standards Agency guidelines, sausages sold as pork sausages must contain a minimum of 42% meat, but this requirement includes not just muscle meat but also fat up to 30% of the meat content, connective tissue up to 25%, and even rehydrated pork rind up to 10% of the declared meat content. This means a sausage advertised as containing 50% pork could theoretically consist of as little as 25% actual muscle meat, with the remainder composed of fat, gristle, skin, and the extensive list of non-meat ingredients including water, rusk, starches, stabilizers, preservatives, flavor enhancers, and colorings that make up the other 50% of the product. The labeling requirements, whilst ostensibly designed to inform consumers, are sufficiently complex and use terminology unfamiliar enough to most shoppers that the average person picking up a package of sausages has virtually no meaningful understanding of what they're actually purchasing. Manufacturers exploit these knowledge gaps ruthlessly, using packaging designs that emphasize pastoral imagery, Union Jack flags, and reassuring text about British farming, whilst the fine print reveals meat content barely above the legal minimum and ingredient lists dominated by substances whose names require a biochemistry degree to decipher. Richmond sausages, instantly recognizable in their bright blue packaging and occupying prominent positions in the chilled sections of virtually every supermarket chain in Britain, exemplify many of the concerns I've outlined. With a meat content of just 42%, precisely the legal minimum, these sausages contain more non-meat ingredients than actual pork, yet their market-leading position and decades of brand recognition have established them as a default choice for millions of British households. Consumer feedback consistently describes an unpleasantly greasy texture, excessive shrinkage during cooking that leaves pans swimming in rendered fat, and a flavor profile so bland and characterless that it suggests extensive use of inferior meat and minimal seasoning. The popularity of Richmond sausages reflects successful marketing rather than product quality, with their low price point and ubiquitous availability creating a perception of value that evaporates the moment you consider what you're actually eating. When a sausage contains 58% non-meat ingredients including water, wheat flour rusk, stabilizers, preservatives like sodium metabisulfite designated as E223, and various flavorings required to mask the inherent blandness of low-meat content products, you're purchasing a heavily processed food product that bears only superficial resemblance to the traditional British banger our grandparents would have recognized. The presence of sulfites in many commercial sausages, typically sodium metabisulfite or potassium metabisulfite listed as E223 and E224 respectively, raises additional health concerns that affect a significant portion of the population. Sulfites function as preservatives and prevent discoloration in processed meats, extending shelf life and maintaining the pink color that consumers associate with freshness. But for individuals with asthma or sulfite sensitivity, these compounds can trigger severe reactions including bronchospasm, skin reactions, and in rare cases anaphylaxis. The Food Standards Agency estimates that approximately 1 in 100 people experience some degree of sulfite sensitivity, yet these preservatives remain widely used in sausages and other processed meats because they effectively reduce spoilage and maintain visual appeal. The fact that sulfites can trigger genuine medical emergencies in susceptible individuals yet remain common in products consumed by millions of families, including young children whose sensitivity status may be unknown, represents a public health compromise prioritizing commercial convenience over consumer safety. The deceptive nature of sausage marketing extends beyond individual brands to encompass systematic patterns across the industry that prioritize shelf appeal and profit margins over genuine nutritional value and consumer well-being. Walking through the chilled meat sections of any major British supermarket reveals packaging adorned with idyllic farmyard scenes, Union Jack flags proclaiming British heritage, and terms like finest, premium, signature. And taste the difference that create powerful psychological associations with quality despite often having minimal correlation with the actual meat content or nutritional profile of the products inside. This carefully orchestrated marketing apparatus relies upon consumer assumptions that higher prices indicate superior quality, that familiar brands can be trusted implicitly, and that products stocked by reputable retailers must meet reasonable health standards. My research examining ingredient declarations and nutritional information across dozens of sausage varieties available in Tesco, Sainsbury's ASDA, Morrison's, and Waitrose reveals that these assumptions frequently prove unfounded, with some of the most aggressively marketed and expensively priced sausages containing surprisingly low meat content, extensive additive lists, and nutritional profiles that rival or exceed budget alternatives in terms of saturated fat, sodium, and calorie density. Wall's sausages represent another concerning example of how major brands leverage decades of market presence and advertising investment to maintain consumer loyalty despite offering products that nutritional analysis reveals to be problematic. The Wall's thick pork sausages, widely available across British supermarkets and frequently featured in promotional offers, contain just 42% pork, precisely matching the legal minimum requirement and indicating a product formulation designed to maximize profit margins rather than nutritional quality. The remaining 58% consists of water, wheat flour rusk providing bulk and binding properties, potato starch functioning as an additional filler, flavorings necessary to compensate for the limited meat content, and preservatives including sulfites that extend shelf life but may trigger adverse reactions in sensitive individuals. Consumer reviews consistently describe these sausages as producing excessive amounts of rendered fat during cooking, shrinking dramatically and leaving minimal edible content, and delivering a texture described as mealy, mushy, or paste-like rather than the firm, satisfying bite associated with quality sausages containing higher proportions of actual meat. The persistence of Wall's sausages as a supermarket staple despite these widely acknowledged shortcomings demonstrates how effectively brand recognition and strategic pricing can override considerations of quality and nutritional value in consumer purchasing decisions. The contrast between minimum standard sausages and genuinely high-quality alternatives becomes strikingly apparent when we examine products at the upper end of the quality spectrum. Hex sausages, a relatively newer entrant to the British market that has gained recognition through emphasis on high meat content and clean ingredient lists, offers chicken varieties containing up to 97% meat with no artificial preservatives, gluten, or dairy. The nutritional implications of this dramatically different formulation become immediately obvious when comparing fat content, with Heck chicken sausages containing approximately 4 grams of fat per 100 grams compared to 15 or 20 grams in many pork sausages formulated to minimum standards. For individuals managing their weight, monitoring cardiovascular risk factors, or simply seeking to optimize their dietary quality, the difference between consuming sausages with 97% meat content and those hovering at the 42% minimum represents not merely a marginal improvement but a fundamentally different food product with entirely distinct health implications. The challenge, however, lies in the fact that Hex sausages typically retail at 2 to 3 times the price of budget alternatives, creating a situation where access to genuinely nutritious sausages becomes partly a function of economic privilege, with lower-income families disproportionately consuming the least healthy options due to price constraints rather than preference or lack of nutritional awareness. This economic dimension of food quality represents one of the most troubling aspects of the modern British food system, creating a two-tier marketplace where affluent consumers can afford to purchase sausages from premium ranges, independent butchers, or brands emphasizing high meat content and minimal processing, whilst those with tighter budgets find themselves effectively forced to choose products formulated to legal minimums with maximum filler content and extensive additive use. The public health implications of this divide manifest in health inequality statistics showing that cardiovascular disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and diet-related cancers occur at significantly higher rates in lower socioeconomic groups, patterns driven substantially by differential access to nutritious food, including quality protein sources. When a family feeding several children on a limited budget can purchase 8 Richmond sausages for £2 while Staidheck chicken sausages cost £6, the economic calculus becomes brutally simple regardless of nutritional knowledge or health concerns. The food industry has created this situation deliberately, recognizing that profit maximization in the mass market depends upon minimizing ingredient costs through use of cheap fillers, mechanically separated meat, and the absolute minimum meat content that regulations permit, then recovering margins through volume sales to price-sensitive consumers who lack viable alternatives within their budgets. Tesco everyday value pork sausages exemplify the extreme end of this cost-cutting approach, retailing at approximately 30 pence per 100 grams whilst containing the bare minimum 42% pork alongside the predictable litany of water, rusk, stabilizers, and preservatives. Nutritional analysis reveals these sausages contain 17 grams of fat per 100 grams, of which 7 grams consist of saturated fat, alongside salt levels approaching 2 grams per 100 grams. 2 of these sausages provide nearly 700 kilojoules of energy, almost 40% of which derives from fat rather than protein, creating a remarkably inefficient protein source that delivers substantial quantities of precisely the nutrients that public health authorities urge Britons to reduce whilst providing relatively modest amounts of the protein that sausages theoretically exist to supply. The textural characteristics reported by consumers mirror those of other minimum standard products, with complaints of excessive greasiness, dramatic shrinkage that sees sausages losing up to 40% of their mass during cooking, and a flavor profile so bland and characterless that it requires substantial seasoning or sauce to render palatable. Yet these products continue selling in enormous volumes because for many British households they represent the only economically feasible option for incorporating meat into meals, creating a situation where the least nutritious sausages achieve the widest consumption precisely because economic constraints force families toward the cheapest available options. The additive content of commercial sausages extends well beyond sulfite preservatives to encompass a range of substances whose functions and health implications remain opaque to most consumers despite their ubiquitous presence in processed foods. Diphosphates designated as E450 through E452 on ingredient labels appear in many sausages as stabilizers and water-binding agents that help maintain texture and prevent fat and water separation during storage and cooking. Whilst these compounds are classified as safe for human consumption within regulated limits, emerging research suggests that excessive phosphate intake, which accumulates across multiple processed foods in the modern diet rather than from sausages alone, may contribute to cardiovascular disease through effects on vascular calcification and endothelial function. A study published in the Journal of the American Society of Nephrology demonstrated that elevated serum phosphate levels correlate with increased cardiovascular mortality even in individuals with normal kidney function, challenging previous assumptions that phosphate posed health risks only to those with renal impairment. The concern extends beyond direct toxicity to the broader question of whether our food supply should contain substances whose long-term effects at population-wide consumption levels remain incompletely understood, particularly when their presence serves primarily to facilitate industrial food production rather than providing nutritional benefit to consumers. Monosodium glutamate, more commonly known as MSG and designated as E621, appears in various sausage formulations as a flavor enhancer that amplifies savory taste perceptions and masks the blandness characteristic of products with minimal meat content and heavy reliance on fillers. Despite decades of research failing to substantiate many of the health claims attributed to MSG, a subset of individuals report experiencing symptoms including headaches, flushing, and palpitations following consumption of foods containing significant quantities of this additive. A constellation of effects, sometimes termed Chinese restaurant syndrome, though the scientific validity of this designation remains contested. More concerning from a public health perspective is the role of flavor enhancers in encouraging overconsumption by making inherently low-quality foods taste more appealing than their actual ingredient composition warrants, potentially contributing to the obesity epidemic by undermining the natural regulatory mechanisms that would otherwise discourage excessive intake of nutritionally poor foods. When sausages formulated with 42% meat and 58% fillers can be made to taste nearly as savory and satisfying as those containing 80 or 90% meat through strategic use of flavor enhancers, the market incentive to produce genuinely high-quality products diminishes substantially, creating a race to the bottom where cost reduction through ingredient degradation becomes the dominant competitive strategy. The plant-based sausage category has expanded dramatically in recent years, driven by growing consumer awareness of the health and environmental implications of meat consumption, alongside ethical concerns about animal welfare in industrial farming systems. Richmond meat-free sausages, leveraging the brand recognition of their conventional pork counterparts whilst targeting the burgeoning flexitarian and vegan markets, contain rehydrated textured soya protein as their primary ingredient alongside rapeseed oil, wheat protein, and various seasonings and stabilizers. Nutritional comparison with conventional pork sausages reveals a complex picture that defies simplistic characterization of plant-based options as automatically healthier. These meat-free sausages contain approximately 7 grams of fat per 100 grams compared to 15 or more in many pork sausages, representing a substantial reduction in total and saturated fat that benefits cardiovascular health. However, their sodium content reaches 1.8 grams per 100 grams, actually exceeding many conventional sausages and highlighting that plant-based does not automatically equate to healthier across all nutritional parameters. The protein content of 16 grams per 100 grams compares favorably to meat sausages and delivers this protein with zero cholesterol and significantly lower saturated fat. Yet the extensive processing required to transform soya protein into convincing sausage analogues results in products containing long ingredient lists including methylcellulose as a binder, various gums as stabilizers, and natural flavorings whose specific composition remains proprietary. Linda McCartney vegetarian sausages, another long-established player in the meat-free category, based their formulation on rehydrated soya protein comprising 58% of the product alongside soya protein concentrate, rapeseed oil, wheat flour, and seasoning that includes sulfites despite the product's plant-based nature. The nutritional profile reveals 1.5 grams of salt per 100 grams, again demonstrating that meat-free does not guarantee low sodium, alongside 5.5 grams of fat, of which 1.7 grams consists of saturates. These sausages provide 16 grams of protein per 100 grams, matching or exceeding many conventional pork sausages whilst delivering substantially less saturated fat and zero cholesterol, making them a cardiovascularly superior option for individuals seeking to reduce their intake of animal fats. The presence of sulfites in vegetarian sausages underscores that these preservatives serve functions beyond preventing discoloration in meat, also inhibiting microbial growth and extending shelf life in plant-based products, meaning that individuals with sulfite sensitivity must remain vigilant regardless of whether they choose meat or meat-free options. Consumer acceptance of plant-based sausages varies enormously, with some individuals finding modern formulations virtually indistinguishable from conventional sausages, whilst others report detecting textural differences, aftertastes, or simply psychological barriers to accepting soy or pea protein as a satisfying substitute for meat. The premium supermarket ranges, including Waitrose No. 1, Marks & Spencer Collection, and Sainsbury's Taste the Difference, generally deliver superior nutritional profiles compared to value ranges, though at substantially higher price points that place them beyond routine afford for many households. Waitrose No. 1 free-range pork sausages contain 82% pork sourced from animals raised to higher welfare standards, seasoned simply with herbs and spices, and produced without artificial preservatives. This dramatically higher meat content translates to improved protein density, reduced filler content, and a nutritional profile more consistent with what we should expect from food marketed as sausages. Sainsbury's Taste the Difference Cumberland sausages achieved Best Buy designation in which magazine testing, with tasters praising their pork flavour, juiciness, and seasoning balance, whilst nutritional analysis revealed 85% meat content and absence of artificial colours or flavours. These products demonstrate that the British food industry possesses full capability to produce sausages meeting high nutritional and quality standards when market positioning and target demographics justify the ingredient costs involved, raising the uncomfortable question of why similar standards do not apply across all price points, given that nutritional adequacy represents a fundamental food requirement rather than a luxury amenity. The small-scale artisan sausage makers operating through farmers' markets, independent butchers, and specialist food retailers typically produce products vastly superior to supermarket offerings in terms of meat content, ingredient quality, and absence of unnecessary additives. A traditional butcher making sausages on premises generally works with meat content approaching 90 to 95%, using cuts and trimmings from whole carcasses broken down in-house, seasoning with straightforward combinations of salt, pepper, herbs, and spices, and stuffing into natural casings without stabilizers, preservatives, or extenders. The resulting sausages exhibit entirely different textural and flavor characteristics compared to industrial products, maintaining structural integrity during cooking without excessive fat loss, delivering robust meat flavor that requires no enhancement, and providing satisfaction and satiety that reflects their genuine meat content and absence of fillers that contribute calories and bulk without corresponding nutritional value. The challenge lies in accessibility and cost, with artisan sausages typically retailing at £7 to £10 per kilogram compared to £3 to £5 for supermarket standard ranges, creating a price differential that places them beyond regular consumption for many families despite their obvious superiority.